So good afternoon. Thank you for taking a few minutes to listen to this presentation. My name is Kevin Katigbak. I lead the strategy team here at Gensler, Toronto. Um, and I guess my specialties are real estate, workplace, ethnography, research, experiential design. And Gensler has taken, and myself specifically, have taken the past 12 months to use this as an opportunity to capture as much data as we possibly can. One of the things that we're seeing, and one of the great impacts on our downtown cores and our urban experience, is how people are reacting to this pandemic, and specifically workers, and what their expectations might be in the future. So I'm going to share a little bit of that data up front because it really does form a lot of what this conversation is kind of getting to. As I mentioned, we did a ton of research in the past year. I think we've done a survey that has tens of thousands of responses at this point. The data I'm sharing on screen is North American specific, and I'll provide a little bit of context on the Canadian specific side of things as well. But one of the key findings that we're seeing from the people that we've asked and how they've reacted to the pandemic is over half the people that we surveyed would prefer a hybrid work model. And I've heard a few of the conversations. So just to level set, the hybrid work model is that notion of working partially from home as well as working in the office. And we asked a very simple question. We asked a lot of questions. The one I'm going to show you right now is pretty simple. It's kind of how many days do you want to work in the office in a post-pandemic world, in a post-vaccine world, in a world where we can almost call normal again? And the responses were kind of across the board, but 29% of respondents said full-time in offices, 19% said full-time from home. The Canadian data says actually a lot less full-time in office. And less full-time at home as well. So that proportion of hybrid is actually a lot greater from the Canadian context. But if we're looking at the data on the screen, 80+% of respondents do believe that the workplace is going to be something that's important in the future. So another key finding, most jobs continue to be reliant on in-person collaboration and the physical workplace, which is fantastic news. We don't need to worry too much about our workplace because there is going to be a requirement for physical space. And I think from some of the earlier conversations, we do know that that person-to-person contact is hugely important in creating culture for organizations and creating vital downtown cores. There's a number of deterrents to wanting to return to office, and I'm just going to share the one that is the biggest from our perspective, and that is actually the commute. So when we slice and dice this data relative to the distance of your commute, there's a direct correlation. And the data I'm showing here is the people who said they want to return to work full-time. And it's pretty obvious and pretty straightforward what this is telling us, but the closer you live to the office, the more likely you are to want to come into the office. And the further you are from the office, obviously, you kind of don't want to return, or you want to keep that as minimal as possible. So it's really about convenience. And if there is a way to get people close to the office, I think that's kind of a win-win for everyone. So yeah, people want to be back into the office in some way, shape, or form. But it's that future office is not going to be kind of this office that you see here, which is what people are maybe used to, less dynamic, less experience driven, perhaps the office space in poor locations, older building stock. And how do we know that people don't want to be in this type of office? Well, we're doing some straight math statistics here. If we look at vacancies, if you think about what Toronto's vacancy rate was prior to the pandemic, it was 1% to 2%, which is very, very tight. It's extremely tight. It's actually very difficult for an organization to grow when there's only 1% to 2% to grow within. If you think about a tech company that grows from 1 floor to 2 floor, you might not get that second floor adjacent to you or in the same building for that matter. So it is a little bit tight. If we think of subprime real estate, which is that kind of space that is, again, maybe out of the downtown core, not around similar business clusters, their vacancy rates increase significantly more. So it's like 6 to 12% right now. And while that isn't hugely alarming, it is a big change. And I think the shock is actually coming from the delta from that tight 1% to 2% to 6 to 12%. If we think about prime real estate, so the downtown core proper, if you think about the business district in the south core of Toronto, that real estate performed much, much better during the pandemic. So people are still building, they're still intending to return to office in some way. There's a little bit of activity. Every downtown core in the world is suffering a little bit now, but it seems that that prime real estate is suffering a little bit less. So why is this bad? And here's a lovely diagram of Toronto. And if we think about where some of the locations of this real estate are, so if you think about office space, both prime and some subprime real estate. So prime is like this blue downtown core piece, subprime is kind of scattered all over the place. And maybe I'll just blanket say it right now so I'm not hurting anyone's feelings. There are great prime real estate offices all over the city, and there are subprime offices all over the city. I just wanted to indicate where there's kind of greater clusters of them. If we think that these are the spaces that are going to vacate more, become vacant in the future, we need to think about how those neighborhoods might adapt to losing a very vital component to their experience, and that is that working population. If you have an office tower with 1,000 workers on it that who go there day to day, that group of people is supporting the local businesses, the restaurants. It's creating vibrancy on the streets. It's creating diversity in those neighborhoods. And if you're missing that population, how can we adapt the space? How can we address for that change in what that dynamic looks like? So this is telling us a few things. One, good office is doing not bad. It's doing pretty good. Two, new offices must be even more people focused. And three, bad office is in trouble. And the first two are pretty easy to address. So one, good office is doing okay. New building stock is always going to have greater infrastructure. It's already been built in a more resilient way. It's probably more energy efficient. It's probably more flexible. It probably has those great amenities that everyone kind of wants. So it's already a desirable sort of asset. New office must be even more people focused. And again, this has definitely been a conversation that has been sort of spoken about across the board. And this here is a huge opportunity. We have a chance to redefine what that space needs to be, redefine what work is to us as, as a culture, as a city, as a country, as the world. What is work need to be in the future? What does work-life balance truly mean? And what is the space that's required to address some of those things? That's a whole other conversation about the opportunities behind that. The last piece is a little bit harder because what we're talking about is having empty spaces, which are, again, perhaps not the best building stock, maybe not located around other business clusters, but probably in pretty prime real estate, probably pretty central in many cases, and probably with some residential surrounding it. What are your opportunities for those types of buildings? And if you're a building owner, a developer, or whatever, you have a few different options. One is this notion of consolidation, and the whole idea behind consolidation is getting new tenants into your space. So as old tenants vacate, how can you draw new tenants in? And there's as we talked about earlier, workplace will be less needed in this, it's going to be needed differently. The amounts of workplace that we need, the amounts of office spaces that we require is going to change probably out of this pandemic. So consolidation might lead to not getting the right type of tenant that you want, or Swiss cheese floors where you have little portions here and there occupied and the rest vacant. So perhaps not a long-term sustainable solution. Renovation and upgrade is also a fantastic option. There's a sustainability story of reusing building stock. There's a big risk here. So one, in an environment where there's high vacancy rates, you might not see the return on that investment. You might actually never see the return on the investment because, as we said, again, office space is less demand. Demolition and new build, it really does put you into the same category as some of those new assets. So you are able to compete, but again, these secondary type of office buildings are not in the best locations. Also, building a new building and demolishing a whole building takes a lot of time and a lot of capital investment. So there's a fourth option, which is the conversion to a new function. So can bad offices support a better urban experience? And the answer is definitely yes, because bed offices really make good residential. Um, and really quickly, I'll talk about what the future might be for these new spaces. And it is talking about creating mixed use communities and more diverse communities. And in the past, redevelopment and revitalization really focused around this notion of creating higher value property in certain neighborhoods. Presently, and Toronto is a great example of this, when we think about how spaces are redeveloped and areas are rezoned, it's about creating nodes, breaking up big swaths of industrial, breaking up big swaths of office towers to integrate residential and other types of space uses and create, again, a more vibrant community. In the future, we have to amplify that effort and really create hyper-diverse spaces that can be scalable, that are diverse in terms of the types of people, the types of businesses that go there, to create real resilience around some of these neighborhoods. And what can we achieve for this? So obviously it allows for better neighborhood revitalization, opportunities for more and new housing types. And I think this is a great opportunity to think about in the future, because as we redefine what work is, I think we're also redefining what home is. And one of the things that we've seen through our research is as people tend to work from home, I mean, everyone's working from home right now, in the future, working from home will happen a little bit more than in the past, at least. We saw there's a gap in the market in terms of a residential condo. So this is really about redefining what that could possibly be. So if you think about how downtown habitation could be different, if you think of a condo complex or apartment building, are there different types of amenities, such as, like a WeWork on the ground floor, or actual units that will have been designed in a way that cohabitants could work together at the same time and not compete over Zoom calls? There really is a lot to think about on what can lure people in, what can draw people in, and create a home experience and a work experience that is really going to be addressing the future needs of work and life. Number 3 here is improve urban density and vibrancy, which we've talked about. And number 4, of course, hit sustainability goals, which I think is probably maybe the most important of these 4. If we can reduce the creation of brand new building stock and repurpose buildings while creating vibrant communities, that's kind of win-win across the board. So Toronto is actually doing a pretty good job. I mean, there's tons of opportunity in Toronto for improvement in our urban fabric. But if you think about North America and probably globally, there's a lot of other cities that this makes a ton of sense. And I'm just going to bring one up that's in our own backyard, Calgary. Which, if anyone who knows Calgary, it's a very decentralized population. They are doing a really great job of trying to get more people in the downtown core. They've done a great effort in creating more residential. But their vacancy rates, they've been hit hard by the pandemic as well as the energy crisis, and their vacancy rate is currently around 27%. So investing in some of these spaces in their downtown core, repurposing them to be a little bit more mixed use, would definitely work in their favor. And a case study that demonstrates sort of the success of this is Detroit. And there's a million different reasons of why Detroit is kind of a buzz city again. But there was a concerted effort to reinvest in some of these downtown spaces and again create that diversity that they've been missing as the sort of death of the auto industry came about. And this graph is basically just showing, there is a point in time when their gross domestic product of the city started to increase in real ways based on people coming back to the downtown core. So I think in conclusion, like, this pandemic has been awful, but really we can utilize this and really turn it as a catalyst to truly innovate and create the cities that our cities are always meant to be, perhaps. That's it. Thank you.